Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today, we are going to do the typical weekend review. We will walk through the top 10, do some deep dives on the new wide releases that are or have come out, like I Feel Pretty, Super Troopers 2, Traffik, if you can count that as a real movie. In any event, we'll walk through the top 10, talk a little bit about some limited releases that are out, and then maybe do a quick little preview about the big iceberg, the big events next week, Avengers Infinity War coming out. So let's just dive into the top 10. Going into the weekend, it seemed like it was going to be pretty much a toss-up. People weren't sure. Super Troopers didn't feel like it was going to make a run for number one. They were thinking low double digits, if that high single digits. It actually outperformed, and we'll get to that one in a second. But the first place race was really between I Feel Pretty, Rampage, and A Quiet Place. I Feel Pretty would had to have really overperformed to do number one, and it didn't do that. It did okay. So the race was really between A Quiet Place and Rampage, with sort of the edge probably going to Rampage just because it's a little bit more recent, and A Quiet Place would have to have a really, really low drop to win number one. The numbers are in. A Quiet Place did it with a 33% drop in its third weekend. Just fantastic. $22 million on the weekend. Like I said, 33% drop. It actually added 200 theaters this weekend in its third weekend. Total take so far for A Quiet Place is $132 million on a budget of only $17 million. Obviously, the P&A, print and advertising budget, was probably, who knows, $30 to $40 million, somewhere in that range, on the lower end of a wide release. What that means is Paramount has a huge win here. It's a big win for them, big win for Michael Bay. The movie is good enough that one of my favorite film critics, Mark Kermode from BBC, I guess 4, he's a really great YouTube channel. If you ever want sort of a more a British sort of cynical viewpoint of films, take a look at his I forget what the YouTube channel is. Just look up Mark Kermode on YouTube and you'll find it. He actually was so impressed with A Quiet Place critically and artistically that he wanted to say positive things about Michael Bay for the first time ever in his critical career. So it's a special film, right? I think it's a confluence of a lot of different people and elements, and it's cool to see something like this be successful, right? Like, it's a small film with a $17 million budget. It has a really interesting concept. It's kind of a marriage of genre and kind of A-list actors. Emily Blunt and John Krasinski are definitely, Emily Blunt, I would say, is bordering on A. John Krasinski, obviously A-lister in TV, in films not so much, but he's becoming that after 13 hours in this. So it was kind of like a genre flick, with a really cool premise that brought in some really great talents. And of course, Michael Bay producing can't hurt. So I think, it's a win for everybody involved, especially Michael Bay and Paramount and Emily Blunt and John Krasinski, who also directed this, which is kind of crazy. They took a chance on him as not exactly a proven director here. He hit a home run and people love it. Audiences love it. And a 33% drop on its third weekend is really insane for a horror film. Now, people might say it's more of a thriller. It kind of seems like a horror film to me, less of a thriller. In any event, so let's take a look at what it did last week, because I'm kind of interested in the drops. Excuse me. 34% drop last weekend, and a 33% drop this weekend. Those are outrageous drops for a horror film. Just like normally a horror film, if you look at, and we'll get to this in a second, but Truth or Dare, your typical genre horror flick, in its second weekend dropped about 58%. That's pretty typical of horror films. So Quiet Place is just going against the trend in a lot of different ways. Also to note, it's a smaller film that is really doing well. It reminds me a lot of Get Out last year, and even Split I don't think was shot for more than $20 million. I think it was more in the $15 million range. So low budget, really interesting concept, well done movie that audiences are responding very positively to. And it just goes to prove, and Deadline put this sort of in their write-up, this morning for the box office sort of review. If you like this stuff and you're really interested in finding your own sources, Deadline.com is probably the best source right now for box office news as it happens. It's a good place to check out throughout the weekends, like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. They usually do one update with what's going on at the box office. They give you some projections, and then on Sunday they kind of do a little wrap up with what the estimates are for Sunday, and a lot of fantastic insider information. A lot of it I include in the podcast, but I usually sort that it is from Deadline. I'm not just stealing their shit. There's a lot of great stuff in this week's article on I Feel Pretty, and I'll talk about that when we get there. So A Quiet Place, what Deadline noted about A Quiet Place is that if you have a really good concept, right, and you execute it well and you market it appropriately, even if it didn't cost $100 million, it can be a big win at the movie theater. People will go out of the way to see a movie if it hooks them in and they think it's an awesome film, no matter how much it costs. And so it's a big lesson for the movie industry that I think they honestly have to learn sometimes over and over again. You look at something like Black Panther, which has taken up so much of the box office this year, such a high proportion of the revenues for 2018 so far. And it teaches the lesson to the movie studios that, like, if I make a massive movie and market the living shit out of it, I can make a great profit. And it kind of, the success of that film lends itself to sort of the popcornification of the box office, which has been an issue and a movement since the mid-90s. The films get bigger and bigger. There's more and more sequels. Everything is a sequel of a sequel or part of some IP that already exists. There's nothing really brand new and original. But A Quiet Place is an example of something really original and brand new that works and connects with audiences. So audiences aren't, they're not like just wanting to see the same thing over and over again or another sequel. They do want to see unique and interesting stuff, and A Quiet Place sort of proves that. Now, on the opposite spectrum here is Rampage coming in at number 2, just shy of A Quiet Place at $21 million. A really decent 41% drop for this in its second weekend. It is still super saturated on over in about 4,100 theaters. Per theater average was $5,100 per theater this weekend. Total take so far for Rampage is $66.6 million. Not a bad performance. Again, it had a large budget, $120 million bucks. It's reassuring, I think, for Warner Brothers and New Line, probably Dwayne Johnson as well, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, is that the drops are so low, and it's really having some nice Friday to Saturday bumps. What that basically means, it's it plays probably better to families. Usually the Friday, especially on opening weekend, is really high, and there's probably a little bit of a drop on a Saturday to the Saturday numbers. And the second weekend, it kind of reverses because there's not that hype to go see it the opening day. Friday tends to be a little bit below a Saturday. In this case, it was really below this weekend Saturday. So that means people are really lining up and really want to see this movie. And I think it's going to have some good legs here. Now, where's it going to end up? Oh, who knows, right? A 41% drop, that I don't know what's going to be able to sustain a drop like that over and over again. But it suggests to me that it's going to have a little bit higher multiplier than we thought last weekend. So let's assume it opened at 35 on April 13th through the 15th that weekend. Let's assume a 3x multiplier puts it at 105, which I think is okay for domestic. I don't know. When this thing opened at 35, I just kind of felt like it needed to be well into the 40s, into the 50s. I thought it would at least match San Andreas, which was, I think, something in the mid 50s for its opening weekend. Director is Brad Payton. I thought he was, for some reason, I thought he did John Carter. He did not do John Carter. He did San Andreas. Also did Cats and Dogs: The Revenge of Kitty Galore, was his first big film, and Journey to the Mysterious Island. He also did a weird film, Incarnate, Blumhouse film, so super small indie flick, or sorry, genre flick, I should say. Not really an indie flick. So Rampage, it's probably going to end around the low 100s here domestically. Internationally, it's doing pretty well. 216 foreign takes so far, so its worldwide total as of today, with Sunday's estimates, is 283. Let's do a little bit of quick math. I may have done this last weekend, but I'm gonna do it again this this time. So if let's say it ends at 110, let's be a little bit generous. The breakdown now is 23% domestic, 76 foreign. That's crazy high foreign take. I don't know if that'll last. Let's just assume that it goes up to maybe 30% domestic, which is still outrageous, but I think a little bit more. This is kind of playing like a Fast and Furious movie, which is makes so much money overseas compared to what it does domestically. Let's assume it ends at like 30% domestic, 70% foreign. That would put a worldwide gross of about $366 million. Let's just say 365 for fun. It'll probably make about 85 to 90% of that in actual revenue once you get all the TV deals, the DVD sales, all that sort of stuff, VOD, SVOD deals in place. Let's just assume 87% of that will be revenue. So you're looking at about 317 million in revenue. Now, if you look at the costs, it's gonna have it's not in a great spot, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I'll just sort of run through some general rules for thinking about the profitability of films. All this is ballpark information. I don't pretend to be an expert. I am super interested in this stuff. I've researched it and done a lot of like my own data analysis. So take it with a grain of salt. I don't work in the industry, but here's what I've gathered so far. Especially if you're interested in this stuff, Deadline did the whole series on the most profitable films. I always say check that out. Please do. They've done it since 2014. I don't know how accurate those numbers are, but they're the best set of data that we have if you're not in the industry. So just it is what it is. They have found, and that's where I'm pulling those like, a typical worldwide release, the total revenue generated by that film is about 85 to 90% of that worldwide release box office. And that includes all the digital stuff and all the VOD, DVD sales, and TV deals, right? That's the revenue generated by that single product, that film. Cost-wise, usually you can use the production budget as a basis for how much it will cost the studio at the end of the day to release it and market it on every single platform, all the way through, just normal basic cable television. The total release window, it's usually the production budget, especially for big movies like this, is about a third of total costs, right? And so if I did that math just like straight up, this would be a loss for Warner Brothers. Now, is it going to be a loss? There's a lot of gray area here. They will find a way, I think, to have Rampage at least break even and maybe make a little bit of a profit. How they'll do that, pull some marketing from the VOD DVD release, instead of pumping $20 million into the DVD marketing or VOD release, pump in 15, 10. They'll find ways to make up on the back end here, sort of like, so it's not like a $15 million loss. They'll find a way to make up that $15 million. Another issue here is that, and I don't know if it got released in China. I gotta double check here. Yeah, it was released in China. So it's done about $55 million in China. Another thing to consider here is that foreign distribution makes less for the studios than it does domestically. General rule of thumb, domestically, the studio takes about 50% of the total box office. So for example, Rampage is at $66 million right now. The studio makes $33 million of that, right? The other half goes to the exhibitors, the movie theaters. Other foreign countries, now it's each country's different. It has its own contract and stuff like that going on. But in general, outside of China, foreign releases do about 40% back to the studio. And then in China, now, sometimes they make special deals, right? But for the most part, it's only about 25% goes to the studio. I'm not sure why that is. I think it's because when a movie is released in China, there's a very specific process that things have to go through. And I think it's handled mostly by a local distributor in China or a domestic distributor in China. So the studio has a lot less to do, I think, but they make a lot less money. They make about half of what they would make in the United States for releasing that same film. Just to keep those in mind. So based on that those ballpark numbers, it looks like to me that Rampage is kind of in the break even range, right? Like kind of the break even world. I don't see it as like a big loss, so it doesn't seem like a big massive flop to me, but I can tell you right now it's not a big win. And when Deadline comes out as most profitable films of 2018, I don't think it's going to make the top 20 if it does make any substantial profit whatsoever. That's just like, it's fun to talk about. Like, it's not pinpoint accuracy when I'm talking about these numbers. I think it does give us a general idea of how a movie is doing. And with Rampage, I think it's kind of a middling performance. It's not great. It's not super bad. I don't even know if it's really that good. It's just kind of like right in the middle, average performance, probably breaks even for Rampage. I thought it was going to do a lot better, to be honest with you. I thought it was going to be a big win. I feel like action movies like this, San Andreas was the perfect example of just a really dumb, fun action movie. Like, it was bread and butter in the mid-90s, like Con Air, The Rock, like all that. There's just tons of a Congo. Even stupid stuff like Chain Reaction was fun. It felt like it was part of that sort of process, but I feel like comic book movies has really taken over that world. And movies like Rampage, I think, just get lost. And there's people just, I don't know, they just weren't into it as much as I thought they were going to be. Okay, so that was number 3 for the weekend, Rampage. Number 3 for the week was I Feel Pretty. Deadline has a lot of good data about this movie. And I think it brings out, so let's talk about the performance first before I dive into what Deadline had to say. And they had a good quote from another studio head about the movie and its performance. So I Feel Pretty going into the weekend was looking like mid-teens, had a really strong preview Thursday night, strong numbers on Friday. We were expecting about 20 million, 21 million Friday afternoon. Saturday did not play well. And I don't know if the Friday nights played well either. So it came in at 16.2 million, which is really low compared to its Thursday previews. It's an SDX release. Amy Schumer is the lead here. It's her vehicle in terms of a film. Who else is in this? Michelle Williams, Emily Ratajkowski, whatever you call her. She's the model. Co-directors Abby Cohen, Mark Silverstein. How do I know these people? I know that name. Didn't they I feel like they must have, it says it's their first movie, but I feel like they've directed before. SDX, which is a newer, bigger studio, a lot of Chinese money involved with that. So I Feel Pretty comes in 16.2, dropped off a lot from the early numbers Thursday, Friday. Was in about 3,400 theaters. Per theater average was not fantastic at 4,700. Production budget was $32 million. So I talked about this film last week, and I kind of did a little bit of a tiny rant on it. And I feel a little bit vindicated because Deadline mentioned the same criticism that I had. And basically, it was like the print and advertising budget for this movie, which came out, was about $30 million. So that's what they used to market the film in a domestic US and Canada release. That's kind of low. And that's something that I called out last week. Like, look, they're not marketing this film very well. I didn't know anything about it, and I follow the industry and look at all the new trailers and stuff like that. I saw the trailer pop up a few weeks ago, and I was like, wait, what? This is coming out? Like, how have they not done any groundwork on this? So it seems like the lower opening weekend might have to do with that lower marketing budget. Something like Blockers, which opened in the low 20s, that had a $40 to $50 million P&A budget. I just want to say marketing budget because like prints and advertising doesn't really make a lot of sense to me as a term anymore. There's no prints, right? If you haven't been following the box office or the movie industry for that long, about 10 years ago, everything started to switch over to digital. And I think now it's like 95% of movie theaters are 100% are all digital. So there's no prints anymore. It comes in like a USB stick, right? The movie to each theater. So I don't know. The marketing budget for SDX was just for I Feel Pretty from SDX was too low. It seems like it was in the 30s. They wanted to open it wide. You need to hit the 40, at least I would say $50 million for a movie like this if you wanted to do it well. Now, if you don't want to go that route, There's other ways that you can do that. There's really heavy social media campaigns that are a lot cheaper, but the engagement or the sort of conversion on those and ROI on those isn't fantastic unless it's a really hooky movie and has a cool premise. Something like A Quiet Place would have a really strong social media hook to it. I Feel Pretty kind of seems like another sort of, hey, it's like a female empowerment film, but we've seen these films so many times before. There's been a lot of criticism specifically for this film because it tries to portray Amy Schumer as like super overweight and ugly, and like she's probably just relatively, I think a lot of women are upset because she's really not. And I think they're upset that it's sending maybe a bad message to a lot of women. It makes them kind of feel insecure in some way. And so not a huge fan with some women, this film. So kind of a tired premise, maybe a little bit off color in terms of its a message. And STX didn't market this appropriately, didn't have the marketing budget. So that's why it's opening sort of depressed at 16.2 million. This should have easily opened at 21, 22. And if it was a really good film, it appears that it's not. I Feel Pretty did 34% on Rotten Tomatoes, 28% audience score. I don't know how much I trust that. You remember, because I'm going to call it the Last Jedi fiasco with Rotten Tomatoes, where it seemed like, because it is an open forum where you can vote no matter who you are on whether you liked it or not, there's no proof that you saw the movie, there's no proof that you don't have another agenda. Like, I don't trust Rotten Tomatoes scores all that much anymore. I trust the critic scores a lot. Those are really well vetted. They have a really good system in place. So critics hated I Feel Pretty, which is not that much of a surprise. It's one of those movies where it's meant less for artistic richness and more for audience engagement and laughter, right? So sometimes those movies don't lend itself to a critic viewing it and liking it, which is the case with a lot of comedies. Cinema score for I Feel Pretty was B+. Not bad at all. I mean, not terrible. I mean, it's not fantastic. If this was going to have good legs, it would need to hit an A- or higher, I think. Now again, cinema score has its own problems. It's a small survey of a small group of people, so it tends to sometimes skew a little bit one way or the other. Plus, it's taken, I believe, Friday night at 7:00 showing. I think that's it. I mean, it's 7:00 across a lot of different cities, but I don't think they go outside of that at all. So it's a little bit skewed, but it is an in-person survey, so you know that people saw this movie. So I think it's a little bit more trustworthy than the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. All right, enough about that. So B+, something the legs aren't going to be super strong. They're kind of be somewhat normal. Little bit of a depressed opening weekend. I think it's safe to say it does 2.7x multiplier. So you're looking at about $44 million. I think it'll probably do a little bit better than that and probably, I think, lake it out to 50. If the cinema score was like lower than B or lower, I probably would say no, it's probably not going to hit 50. But the fact that it's B+ gives me a little bit of hope that it might hit the 50 range. Overall, it'll probably be a big VOD movie. It's not one of those movies where you're going to go out of your way to see in the theater because it doesn't really feel like an event. It doesn't really feel special. It feels like it's already been done 1,000 times before. Let's take a look. Just curious to see what it did on Metacritic. Let me give you a chance to pull that up real quick. So overall, not a great performance. What did Deadline had a good quote from had a good quote from another like an executive in the movie theater industry. I thought it was from the SDX person, but here's the quote. It's not from SDX person. It's from just a general executive in the movie theater business. Tough to see how this picture breaks even. STX will need to have a net revenue of $53 million plus interest from all domestic markets to avoid losing money. Okay, that makes sense. So STX only went in half in. They only paid about $15 million for the domestic distribution of this film. It's being distributed by somebody else overseas, it sounds like. the point they're trying to make here, just in general, it's not performing well. It needs to make a significant amount of money to break even. Significant being, I have no idea how to parse those numbers, to be honest with you. But if it ends up at like 50 million bucks, it's going to be kind of a loss for STX, it sounds like. So not a good performance at all. Not surprising though, right? If we I love taking a step back, you know that. Why did this not open well? It just was not marketed appropriately and the quality is not high. It's not like you can take any sort of product discussion, development, criticism, or analysis and apply it to these films. Like, if you don't put out a good product and you don't market it appropriately, it's not going to sell, right? I mean, it's just very simple, straightforward rules. This product wasn't good and they didn't market it well enough, and that's why it's not selling. It's pretty much that simple. So we'll see how I Feel Pretty does. I don't expect massive drops. My guess for the drop is like 45% next weekend, so kind of average to low. So Matt, we'll see if it legs it out to 50 million bucks, but it doesn't really matter because it's not going to make any money. Okay, so that was number 3 for the weekend. Coming at number 4, Super Troopers 2, come up 14.7 million. I believe they were thinking this was only going to do kind of mid to high single digits, like 5 to 7, I think was tracking. Only in 2,000 theaters. Per theater average was $7,200. Budget was 13.5 million, 5 million of which I think was funded through, actually 4.6 million was crowdfunded on Indiegogo. Really strange thing. Like, I don't know how I feel about this stuff, but it seemed like Super Troopers 1 was a huge cult hit. I remember when it came out, like nobody saw it in the theater, but became a huge cult classic on DVD rental and people owning it. And it's just become one of those movies that won't ever go away, essentially. And I think there's a building of sort of like crowd enthusiasm over a sequel. The guys at Broken Lizard with the comedy troupe said, hey, let's try and do a crowdsource thing, and maybe Fox Searchlight, who put this out. I think it was Fox Searchlight or just Fox, who knows. It's listed as Fox, but I thought it was Fox Searchlight. Anyways, said, hey, yeah, we'll do it if you guys get this thing started and raise some money on crowdfunding. So they raised 4.6 million, the second biggest crowdfunded take of all time, I think. I think the top one's like 5 million bucks. In any event, so the fans made this happen, which is so cool to see. And it's awesome to see it really overperform. Like, of course, it was coming out because of 420. The film has, a huge sort of, I don't know what you call this group. Like, I'm old, I guess, now. It's like people who smoke weed, like tokers. Like, what am I, 77 years old? The weed crowd loves, the 420 crowd, the trees crowd loves this film. I guess I don't understand the connection there. I should understand this. I'm not a big weed smoker, and I'm not really that in touch with that culture. But like, I remember when this came out, and it was sort of just like Animal House, but with state troopers in Vermont. It's a really funny movie, the original. It's so super low budget, and you know that, and they know that too. And then you're kind of in on the joke, so it's kind of ironic at the same time. And then it just became this huge weed 420 film. I don't know how that happened. I'm probably missing some huge plot point in the movie that connects the two, but I think it's just part of that culture. And it did really well. Now this thing is, I think, going to have a massive drop well over 50% next week, probably 55 to 60%, I would say, in terms of a drop. But you can't argue with this performance. Like, it sounded like a good idea. It's going to do really well on VOD. I think a lot of people are going to buy this film. It's one of those films you just smoke weed to. I mean, that's just what the first one was too. I think that's why it became popular. It wasn't popular in the theaters because you couldn't smoke weed in the theaters while you're watching it, and they didn't know about it. But then when it hit DVD and like digital release, and more DVD than anything, because that was the DVD era. I remember this is like the mid 2000s. And so DVDs were everywhere. I still have a stack of like 300 DVDs beneath my TV that I have not touched in about 7 years. So it was one of those DVD cult classics, and I think it seemed kind of like a crazy idea to do a second one, but it worked out for the best here. So we'll see how that one does, but I do expect a pretty steep drop in the second weekend. Number 5, Truth or Dare. Talked a little bit about this one already. Universal Blumhouse, 7.9 million, 58% drop for the weekend. Still in 3,000 theaters. Per theater average is $2,500. Total take so far for Truth or Dare is $30.4 million. Not bad on a $3.5 million production budget. Obviously, marketing was pretty high, or decently high for this, but I think Truth or Dare is going to be, if not already, is definitely going to be in the profitable range for Blumhouse, who can do no wrong at this point. It's funny about Blumhouse. They can do no wrong, but it's like they release a lot of films, and all they need is like half of them to break even, and then like maybe 1 out of 10 really breaks out, like Get Out, and they're like just printing money over there. So a good performance here for that film. Number 6, Ready Player One, 7.5 million. Great 35% drop. Starting to lose a lot of theaters. Lost about 450. It's still in 3,200 theaters. Per theater average is getting close to the sort of cutoff line for wide releases at about $2,200 per theater. Oh wait, sorry, I misread that. $2,300 per theater. Total take so far is $126 million in its 4th weekend. I don't know what the read is on this. I go back and forth every weekend when the numbers come in on that. I can't tell if it's like good, bad. Worldwide so far, $521 million. The one thing, and I noted this with Rampage, I'm noticing that foreign box office is really shooting up. And certainly movies like Rampage and Ready Player One are going to play well overseas, especially in Asia, I think, like in China. But these percentages are really, I didn't notice it until Fast and the Furious, I think 7, and especially the recent one. Wow. Like normally a wide release film is going to be about 40% domestic take, which is US, Canada, 60% foreign take. That is really shifting pretty dramatically over the last couple of years. So Ready Player One's only 25% domestic, 75% foreign right now. I don't really see that changing all that much. So I don't know. I'm going to have to start investigating a little bit more into the foreign box office and start to integrate it more in the podcast, just because it's becoming such a force on whether a movie is profitable or not, which is kind of what this podcast at the end of the day is all about. I love talking about the box office, but I really want to know if a film is successful or not on a financial level. And it's hard to do that now without diving into at least some of the foreign box office numbers. But Ready Player One playing okay domestically, doing pretty well really well. Well, okay. I'm going to say pretty well overseas. It's still a hard rate because I just don't know that much about the international box office numbers and how it works. Country by country is the problem. Like I understand that the US and Canada numbers really well and have for a long time. But I do not, like, how is it doing in Hungary? I don't know. Is that good or bad? I don't even know if it's the UK numbers. I don't really know. Or Australia. I don't know what's good or bad yet. So I'll have to start looking into that a little bit more. But the bottom line story is okay performance domestically, a lot better on the foreign market. I think it's a little bit of a disappointment overall for Ready Player One. I think they thought it was going to be $600-700 million by now. It's not. Is it going to be a big loss? I don't think so. Is it going to be break even? Probably. A little bit of profit. Yeah, once you get VOD and DVDs in the streaming rights involved, probably. But I'm going to say a little bit, not necessarily middling performance, maybe even worse than that. Maybe a little underwhelming. I think it's an underwhelming performance because I think there was a potential here for this really to break out, and it just never broke out, especially domestically. International, a little bit of a different story. But I don't know. I don't have a read on this yet. I'm not committed to saying where Ready Player One sits yet. I'm going to let it play out for a couple more weeks before I make a final call. Number 7 was Blockers this weekend. 6.9, almost just shy of $7 million for the weekend. Great 35% drop for this rated R comedy. Lost about 280 theaters, still in 3,100. Per theater average was $2,200 for the weekend. Total take so far for Blockers is $48 million. Contrast this with I Feel Pretty. Both is I Feel Pretty PG-13? I don't even know. It seemed like a PG-13 movie. Yeah, it was. So it should have played a lot better. Blockers made for $21 million. I Feel Pretty 32. So already an $11 million difference there. Blockers is going to do significantly better than I Feel Pretty. Had a probably $10 to $12 million increase in its marketing budget. That's probably why. Like, I don't know if they're like audience scores, I think are pretty similar for both. But it just goes to show you that like you really do have to market a film well in order for it to play well. And everything is an extrapolation of opening weekend. It's like the way I view opening weekends at the box office is how big of a splash it's going to make. It's like dropping a pebble into a pond. And every other weekend is the reverberations, the ring in the water expanding from that opening weekend. If it's a massive thing, it's going to make a pretty big wave, right? But if it's tiny, it's not going to do that well. And I think that's what marketing is all about. You want to get people hyped. You want to get them out there opening weekend, because that will be, it's like inertia. If it does really well opening weekend, it's going to do decently well second weekend, as long as it's an okay film, and kind of reverberate outside of that. And that's what happened with Blockers. And that's why Blockers is going to do so much better, or I should say significantly better than I Feel Pretty. Like, Blockers in its third weekend is sitting where I Feel Pretty is going to end up after like 8 weeks. So, I mean, that's the difference, right? Okay, so that was number 7. Number 8 was Black Panther, 4.6 million, a 19% drop. I mean, people just love this movie. Per theater average is still $2,400 in its 10th weekend. I mean, people will not stop seeing this movie. Total take so far is 681. Let's take a real quick look. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but we're at 681 domestic takes so far for Black Panther. Its opening weekend was 202, 3.37 multiplier, which is absolutely bonkers for a huge blockbuster like this, especially an MCU film, which tend to have a little bit lower multipliers because they're, I don't know, they just tend to. So fantastic performance. The opening weekend was obviously a huge story with Black Panther, but I think that the second biggest story is its legs and how well it's played over the last 10 weeks. It should be hitting home video, I think mid-May. If we're at the 10 week, it usually hits around 12 or the 13th week, somewhere around there. So it should be coming out on home video and DVD, but we've seen with like The Greatest Showman or whatever it was, and Jumanji, even if it's on home video, people go still see it in the theaters, which I think is just so bonkers and weird. But it is what it is. And I think Black Panther might be one of those movies because, of course, Avengers Infinity War is coming out. Like, that's a good double header. Do Black Panther, do an Avengers Infinity War. It's like 5 hours of film, but like whatever, go for it. I think they might package those together. If I was a movie theater owner, I would 100% do that at least once, like a Saturday afternoon, like a back-to-back. I think it would do well. Number 9 was Traffik, a new wide release. Lionsgate, looks like a direct VOD movie. I don't know what they were thinking with this. $3,700 per theater, ended up at 3.8 million, and only about 1,000 theaters. I don't even really want to talk about that movie. I don't know what this is a direct-to-DVD movie. Why are you putting it out? Obviously, they didn't sink any money marketing into it, but like, I don't know. It just seems like a strange movie to put in the theaters. That's all I'm going to say on it. Well, let's take a look at the Rotten Tomatoes score. 24% in Rotten Tomatoes from critics. That's obviously what's going to happen. 73% audience score. Is there a cinema score? No. Cinema score is like, no. We're not doing this movie. It's not even worth our time, which I agree with. So that was number 9. Number 10 was Isle of Dogs. I totally called this. Why? Oh man, it's just, I don't know. Sometimes it's just like frustrating reading a lot of articles, box office articles, and like stuff is so clear to me and to a lot of people who follow the box office. And then you get these people who, I don't know, they make money. I guess it's like clickbait articles. I'm not going to name anybody, but there's a lot of people who are box office writers. There's not a lot of them. You probably pick them out, who write articles to get clicks, and they lie and they misrepresent what's happening. Isle of Dogs is a perfect example of that. Like, a lot of the hype going, oh, look at this massive opening weekend and limited run. Like, congratulations. A Wes Anderson film did well in New York and Los Angeles. Who gives a flying fuck, right? Of course it's going to do well in New York and Los Angeles. The real question for a film like that is it going to play well in Peoria, Illinois? Is it going to play well in Omaha or San Antonio? Like, that's what makes a really good film, really good performance versus an okay performance versus a bad performance. And Isle of Dogs is a hit with the people who see it. The problem is not a lot of people are seeing it. 91% in Rotten Tomatoes. It's a Wes Anderson film. Who doesn't love Wes Anderson, especially you're into film? 88% audience score, so fantastic. I wonder if Cinema Score even did. I've been checking pretty constantly for the Cinema Score on Isle of Dogs. Let's see if they did it. I don't think that they did. Yeah, that pisses me off too. Like, why wouldn't you do that film? It's probably too limited. But it's on 2,000 screens, or 2,000 theaters, so that seems pretty wide to me. In any event, I sound super exasperated right now. It's just frustrating to see this stuff. It's like, Isle of Dogs is a New York, Los Angeles film. It is for a very specific demographic in the United States and Canada. Urbanites, cosmopolitans. I would say the perfect person for this film, someone with a liberal arts degree, is a product manager at a tech company who has a couple of kids. Like, that to me is like, that's who sees this film. This is not somebody who's like an accountant in like Oklahoma City. That's like not their film. And right. And the way that the people were talking about it, right, about, oh, it's going to, it's so good. It's so fantastic. Quality doesn't matter if it's not the appropriate product for a specific group of people, right? It was marketed well. It's been marketed for a very long time. But ultimately, the product itself, this film, is not meant for everybody. It's meant for a very specific group of people. And it played well with that group of people. And now as it is expanded out to other groups of people, it's not playing well. Its per theater average is $1,700 in its fifth weekend. And I think it's only its second weekend in wide release. It's in about 2,000 theaters. Total take so far is $24 million. Now, this is not a terrible performance, right? I think it's a Wes Anderson film. It's stop motion animation or claymation, I guess you'd call it. I don't know what it is. Fantastic Mr. Fox. I got to check and see what that did. But this is playing okay. I guess what frustrates me is that people thought that this would do better than this. Look, it's already beaten. Fantastic Mr. Fox only did $21 million back in 2009, which is almost 10 years ago now. Moonrise Kingdom did 45. Grand Budapest did 59. So relatively, I think it's a good overall performance, right? Like, it's not a flop. But I think there's expectation from Fox Searchlight and everybody involved in the marketing side of things that this was going to be, it's going to make $50 million easy. It's going to be a big hit with families. It's too weird for most families. Wes Anderson's a weird guy. And I don't mean that dismissively. I mean, he's an auteur. He's an artistic director. He does not do things the easy way. He wants to make something thought-provoking. I'm sorry. And it seems like Isle of Dogs meets that goal, but that's not an appropriate product for a lot of people in the United States and Canada. They don't want to see that. They don't want to see something weird. They want to see something stupid. They want to see something like Secret Life of Pets. Now, that was dismissive because Secret Life of Pets is a trashy, stupid movie. But it made, $300 million in pure profit, right? So it's like the movie industry in Hollywood is sort of, sometimes they get like mixed up with stuff. Like, this was an art film from the start. I don't even know if it should have ever gone wide, super, super wide. I would have just have it played in like cosmopolitan, bigger cities for a long time. And don't push it out wide. You know why? Why do you expect this to play well in Omaha? It doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, okay, that's my single rant for this show. That's the top 10. Anything else worth talking about here? Any high per theater averages? The Writer, I don't know what that is. Lean on Pete, A24 film that I was really excited about because I love A24 and it looked really good. Really terrible performance. Only about $350,000 so far in about 65 theaters, $2,700 per theater. I thought that. I didn't think it was going to do super well, but I just hope they would do a lot better than that. Love, Simon doing okay. Only down to about 500 theaters, and a 6-week over release, did about $40 million. Not bad. Wrinkled Time is still out there, $93 million so far. That's definitely a pretty decent flop. Pacific Rim Uprising, $58 million, massive flop. Sherlock Gnomes, 39. Acrimony. Chappaquiddick, surprisingly, at $14 million right now. I Can Only Imagine dropped out of the top 10. $79 million for that $7 million film. Really good performance from Roadside Attractions and that sort of Christian music film. Okay, so I think that's mostly it. There's no other limited releases I really want to talk about. let's just talk a little about what's coming up. I love doing this. Let's tee up the next couple of weeks and what's happening. Bleecker Street has Disobedience coming out. I don't think that's going to do anything. IFC has Let the Sun Shine In coming out. Probably not going to do anything either. Kings I've not heard of from the Orchard. Tiny little films. The big film next weekend, obviously, is Avengers Infinity War. I think I'm going to do a preview show maybe Wednesday, Thursday, just to talk about where we think it's going to hit. It's going to be a massive movie. It's probably almost, right now you're looking at least 220s, 230s opening weekend. Tracking says higher. Tracking says like 230 to 240, even up to 250. So there is a potential here that it could be The Force Awakens, and I got to take that seriously. I don't think it's going to. I'm guessing probably the 210s, 220s. And that's already the second biggest opening of all time, so that's something to scoff at. But people are kind of, I don't know, it's the MCU hype thing. It always happens. And sometimes tracking's way off. Like Black Panther the day before it opened was 170, opened at 202. So it can be off like, $32 million. But it also kind of goes in a direction. This reminds me a little bit of Civil War. Like I think the tracking on that was, it's going to break 200 million easy, blah, blah, blah. And then it does like 170, whatever it did, 176. I get the feeling that this is going to be similar to that, only because like I feel like Black Panther was such a unique and special film for a lot of people, not just African Americans. I think it was just like a big film for a lot of people in America and Canada and worldwide. It was just, there's something about that film that really attracted all different types of people. Avengers Infinity War is obviously the culmination of 10 years of MCU. I don't know, it kind of just feels like another chapter in the Avengers world. You had Avengers, the first one, obviously massive. Ultron, Civil War, Captain America Civil War felt like Avengers 3. This kind of feels like Avengers 4. I don't know. It seems a lot of more of the same. And if people are super into that, Black Panther didn't seem that way. Black Panther seemed like something brand new and different. This feels a little bit like more of the same. So I'm guessing that it's not going to break the Force Awakens record. That would be really hard to do. But I think it's going to perform insanely well, just because the MCU people are so hyped for this, and it has amazing pre-sales, and it's an event film, and event films get people to go out and see movies. So I think it's safe to say it breaks the 210s pretty easily. I'm thinking 220s. I think anything in the 230s, 240s, 250s seems a little bit too high to me. I just don't see how it breaks The Force Awakens. Right? I just don't, like, The Force Awakens was felt like one of the biggest movie event in my entire life. The prequels were pretty big, but I don't know. There's something about The Force Awakens with J.J. Abrams, Disney having control of the movie. It just felt like the true sequel 30 years later to Return of the Jedi. So that's that. I think it's going to do quite well, and I'll do a preview show because I'm just thinking about it. I'm super fascinated by that movie. Okay, the weekend after that, we get into May. Happy summer-ish season. Nothing's coming out. Totally Overboard and Bad Samaritan. Only one from like a decent-sized studio, Focus Features, is putting out Tully. That's not going to do anything. Is that the Diablo Cody movie? Oh, nobody's going to see that. What are they thinking? Whatever. I'm not even going to get into that. That's a limited release at best. It seems almost like a Netflix movie or a HBO movie. It's pretty arty. I don't know how that's going to play at all. Wide release. After that, you have Breaking In from Universal, Life of the Party, which is Melissa McCarthy, Gillian Jacobs movie. The PG-13 comedies are just really rough this year. I don't think it's going to do very well. Breaking In kind of seems like it'll do all right. It's a thriller. Gabrielle Union, Billy Burke. Who's this director? James McTeague. Did Ninja Assassin, V for Vendetta? What a weird ass career. Those don't look like big films to me, either of them. Maybe they open in the teens. Breaking In, I could see breaking out a bit, but not massively at all. Anything on the limited stuff that looks good? Not really. Book Club. So this is May 18th, the weekend after that. Show Dogs. I don't know what that is. Deadpool 2 is going to be, I think, massive. the last one opened at 130. It was only expected to open at like 50 and like doubled, almost tripled its tracking. So, obviously Deadpool movies tend to overperform, or at least the first one did. I'm assuming the second one's going to do very well, but there's been some weird buzz about it. Like, apparently it's not very good. Ryan Reynolds sort of broke up with the original director, Tim Miller. That suggests some big problems, just because I think Tim Miller was a huge reason why that first film was so good. And I think Ryan Reynolds and him got into a tiff, and it was big enough where they had to sort of break up, and Ryan Reynolds took over the film. No, he's not directing it, is it? I don't think so. No, of course not. Right? It doesn't say the director, so I'm assuming he's not. But I think he has creative control, is what I mean by that. And so who knows what Deadpool's going to do? And then we get into the end of May with Solo, Star Wars, and then on into the real summer season of June. It's going to be it's a really weird May. And I talked about this last weekend. The box office is in just a very strange place right now. You look at stuff like Rampage and Ready Player One doing okay, not doing fantastic here domestically. A Quiet Place, was a big surprise for a lot of people. Unique IP, brand new idea, really cool horror movie, doing well, really breaking out. But those big established industry movies like Rampage and Ready Player One aren't performing fantastically. A big percentage of this year was Black Panther. It feels like, I don't know, is the box office just going to be Avengers films and like Deadpool sequels and Star Wars movies moving forward? It kind of like, I'm looking at May and it kind of feels that way. It looks like the stuff that's coming out besides Avengers, Deadpool, and Solo, they don't look like significant films at all. They look kind of like throwaway films that are made for like maybe $20 million tops. Some of them are way lower than that. So I don't know. I don't know where the box office is going. I feel like it's in a really weird place. If Avengers Infinity War does really well, has really good legs, I think, all this money is going to Disney, though, which I think is another problem, because they're going to try and swallow up 21st Century Fox. And that's a monopoly problem. Like, that's like an antitrust problem, I feel like. If they're taking such a high percentage of the box office in the business, and people are going to say, oh, well, they make the best movies and they make the most popular movies. That may be so, but that's not, I don't know, that's not how a market should work in general. There should be competition. There should be different voices coming out. And unfortunately, because of the way that markets tend to work when they're not regulated, this is what's going to happen every single time. One or two studios are going to take over everything, shut down every other movie production out there in terms of just like pushing them out. There's nothing else is opening on May 27th. 15-20 years ago, you could open a few blockbusters on the same weekend and they would fight it out. That doesn't happen anymore, right? You have Avengers on March 27th, you have Deadpool 2 on March 18th or May 18th, and then you have Solo on May 25th, and there's nothing else coming out those weekends that are even remotely interesting. So I don't know, it's becoming very top-heavy industry, and as long as those films keep performing, everybody's going to be happy. The movie theaters are going to be happy. They don't care, right? They'll put like 10 screenings of Avengers up, but eventually I feel like it kind of feels a little bit like a house of cards. And without a healthy indie and mid-tier film distribution market, I feel like the box office is going to start losing a lot of cash. But we'll see what happens. I will be back midweek with an Avengers Infinity War preview show, I think. Thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wild Loud Podcast.